morning, good evening. Thanks for tuning in to The Fact Is with Hollis Grant. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. We are finally through the rules for radicals. This is it. We're done. 13 rules, and we'll discuss how they're practically used today of what's happening in the media or what's happening in the world, wherever you are. Mostly how it relates to COVID and how we are in a time of unprecedented wealth distribution, of power, lost, democracies have failed, doom and gloom, you could say, perhaps. It is what it is. But we'll just go in here and talk about Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, and we'll leave off at number 12. Or where we did leave off was 11, sorry. So the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. There you go. That's pretty simple right there. Next, my personal favorite of all these rules is the best for last, and this is pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Right here, the 13th rule is where we are today, and the one example that you can say without a doubt is the COVID pandemic. I'm not going to say that COVID's not real. I'm not going to say that it's all made up. I'm not going to say that it's a giant global cabal that's trying to take over the world and it's led by Bill Gates. Not going to say that because that's not the facts. But what I will say is people with these mindsets that work in government, that work in bureaucracy, have learned these and think this way. So when you pick a target, in this case, you're picking and you're doubling down on the pandemic and COVID. Freeze it. Meaning, what else do you hear about in the news today? What interesting items have you heard at all, anywhere, on any news channel that's really not related to COVID? You hear stories daily about how small businesses are overcoming and diversifying, about opening up new ways to target their customers. We hear about long-term care and how they're helping elderly people. We're hearing about dancing healthcare workers that dance in hospitals to help society on TikTok because dancing nurses bring me so much joy. You hear so many articles or a discussion is just driven by COVID. Because the target is COVID, they're freezing it, and they're personalizing it. And how do you personalize it? And you share these one-off stories of people that are sick in their 20s that have died from COVID, but they're not telling the entire story where they're talking about a person died from it, but they have underlying conditions. You could say that COVID was the straw that broke the camel's back. Yes, it's a bad disease, and that's what happened. But there are underlying conditions. That's all it is. Now, you polarize it. Well, how do you polarize this situation? What's the perfect example of polarization of COVID? The mask. You have your masks wearers and you have your no mask wearers. Well, what did you do? Well, you come back, apply a label to them, people that aren't doing what you want to. Then you have your terms of your mask wearers and your anti-mask. You come up with that term of anti-mask. So if you're not for the idea, then you must be against it. So anti has a negative connotation. Who wants to be associated with anything of anti? Antichrist, for instance, those are terms that you hear that, and you think, well, that's a bad thing. So to be anti is never a good thing. So here we are, you've polarized it. You've polarized people to go, either you're with us or you're against us. There is no in between. My mindset, my personal mindset is you wear a mask if you wear a mask. Wear one, that's fine. We're not going to talk about the science. We're not going to talk about the deep dive into filtration rates of your mask. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about merely the rules for radicals and how they're applied. So picking the target, freezing the target, personalize, and polarize. And COVID has been the prime example of that. Now you can apply the same tactic for anything. So we can go back and we can talk about other events that happened in the summer. We can talk about Black Lives Matter. The target, Black Lives Matter. Talk about it nonstop. That's your freezing it. You freeze that. You personalize it by having your people interviewed, giving personal accounts of a story and how they were victimized or how they were held down or downtrodden or quote-unquote oppressed, and polarize it. Have two sides. Drive negativity. And there you go. That's how you created that particular movement. So go through them all. We'll go through the rules. Number one, so power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Never go outside the expertise of your people. Number two, we'll apply that to COVID, where you see the same people over and over and over again. You're never getting a second opinion from another bureaucrat. You're only hearing the same people, the same few quote-unquote experts. There are tons of experts that have not been given any airtime at all. So I can give two doctors, for instance, Dr. Dan Erickson and Dr. Artin Masai, and I'm sure that you're unaware of these two remarkable doctors that have a care facility down in Bakersfield, California, and they're on the front lines of COVID, for instance, talking about it, and they have talked about some really great aspects of this particular disease, but you won't hear about them. You won't hear them at all because the mouthpiece, or the people that they want in front of the news, they're there. So you're only going to deal with their experts. Whenever possible, go outside the expertise of the enemy. In this case, there is no enemy, and no one else is standing up and saying, "Oh, COVID's bad," because if they are, well, later rules apply. Number 4, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. Number 5, ridicule is a man's most potent weapon. There is no defense. It is almost impossible to counterattack ridicule. It also infuriates the opposition, who then react to your advantage. So, calling somebody an anti-masker, for instance, anti-science, you're making fun of that particular individual. It's happening today when people are saying, well, this doesn't make sense. They're shouted down and they're ridiculed for it. You're just an anti-masker. 6, a good tactic is one your people enjoy. 7, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. I'll use number 7. And today, we're learning about the great mutation of COVID-19. Could it be COVID-20 that they would want to call it? United Kingdom's locked down. Flights have been banned. Countries aren't accepting the British or people in Britain because of this new strain. It's a new tactic. It's no longer COVID-19. You're going to now call it COVID-20 or whatever they're going to call it, a super COVID a more effective, a more potent, a dangerous. So it shifted. That now has shifted to another problem. Because COVID's already been beaten down as a dead horse, now they need to extend it by changing it. 8, keep the pressure on. So you're always going to keep, in this case, your pressure on COVID. Number 9, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. Well, the threat of COVID is terrifying. If you listen to CNN, if you listen to, in Canada, CBC, if you listen to any news network, COVID is such a deadly, terrifying thing that if you're going to get it, you are going to die. It is going to kill you. I ask you, and honestly answer the question to yourself. Do you know anyone personally affected by COVID? Do you know any one individual, not a friend of a friend, not my girlfriend's friend, not my boyfriend's friend, not my wife's sister's friend? Do you actually know of an individual that has spent time in the hospital due to COVID? If you can answer that, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear their story and what happened. But the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. And if you do have it, chances are you might not even known you had it because it might have just been a flu or you might have been sick for a couple days. Everybody experiences some type of sickness in the flu differently. And yes, it's deadly in people that are over the age of 80. And the statistics do not lie on that one. It's not good. But also any flu over the age of 80 is not good when your average life expectancy is around 84 in North America, lower in other countries. Number 10, the major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain a constant pressure on the opposition. Well, here we go, constant pressure. How do you not see that happening in today's world? Number 11, if you push a narrative hard and deep enough, it will break through into its counterside. This is based on the principle that every positive has a negative. Number 12, the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. Number 3, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. So there we go, the rules for radicals from Saul Alinsky. I would like to point out that Saul Alinsky did a lot of great work. I use the term great in quotes, work with the people of Chicago. And in the 60s, he went in and raised a lot of money. It was around $30,000 that he raised from the African-American community and black community to organize them, to get them into a position where they could create a labor force, workforce, unionize, if you will. Let me ask you a question, and that was back in the 60s. How well did that $30,000 investment do for them? Well, one of the people to come out of Chicago was Barack Obama. And he was a community activist in the 60s. So you could say, yes, they've done quite well. You know, that foundation, that grassroots effort that Saul Alinsky helped with the black people of Chicago paid off because, yes, Chicago's own became president. But did he? Because we know that Barack Obama, yes, did live in Chicago, and yes, he did, but does he have roots there? No. He's from Hawaii, so there's that. Now we can look at what's the poverty rate in Chicago and the South Side now. Is nearing 60%. 60% of households are living in poverty. And this is from 2014. So 60% of the people live in poverty. So when that foundation was laid in the 60s and that small price of $30,000 in 1960 was there to help organize and really help the downtrodden, help the oppressed, who did it honestly help all these years later. Certainly not the people that intended it to. So, was Saul Alinsky a great guy helping the downtrodden? He went on record to say that in an interview that if he went to hell, he fancied himself going to hell. And if he was in hell, he would take the people and organize the people of hell. Because they're have-nots. The world's full of haves and have-nots. And it's upon him, and it's his life work to make the have-nots get their share. And when you look back and how he treated and how he worked, you can see the polarization of his own life and how he viewed the world, and has taught in a way to learn to divide. So conquer and divide. And that's what he was so good at, is polarizing. The man from the 60s, who's long since dead, has finally gotten his wish when you can say now that there is complete polarization. There's polarization. If you say to somebody, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, there's automatically an instant hatred of the other party. It's so bad that if you're familiar with dating apps, there's people that will just put down on their profiles that I don't want to talk to Trump supporters. I don't want to talk to this political belief. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign in society when we've become so divided that we can't just sit down at a table with the other side and talk. Nothing good comes down from not talking and a breakdown of communication. So with that happy note, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to the Rules of Radicals over 4 parts. I know it's been quite intense and a lot of ramblings here. But thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.